The Buffalo Diocese has completed its initial meetings with parish families, providing recommendations on more than 70 parishes across Western New York. Though he did not participate in any of the meetings over the past 2 weeks, Bishop Michael Fisher just released a written statement. In part, it says he understands the recommendations are difficult for many and that these churches are like a home to the faithful. He goes on to echo what church leaders have been saying for years, really, that these closures and mergers are necessary for the future viability of the diocese.
To talk more about their decision to right-size and reshape, right now we are joined by Father Bryan Zielenieski, the Vicar for Renewal and Development at the Diocese of Buffalo. Father, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon.
My pleasure.
So here we are, the full list of recommendations is out. Reflect a little on these past 2 weeks. What do you make of this list?
It's been a very fast 2 weeks, and one that certainly hits the hearts of many people across Western New York, because we're talking about their spiritual homes. And so as we're looking at this, it's been a time in which we have to look at the reality before us. For those that have been attending Mass regularly, when they sit in church, you look around, you notice that pews aren't as full as they used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. And so for many of the faithful, what I'm hearing back is that this isn't necessarily a surprise, and that we know we have to do something, particularly as part of the Chapter 11 reorganization, as we look at using our resources more appropriately for the future, and of course with our priest numbers. We have to be realistic about the future.
These meetings have been taking place all across Western New York over the past couple of weeks. We have certainly heard from the faithful with each family as the process works its way through. Many of them are saying sort of the same things. Let's talk about one of the most common things that we are hearing, and I imagine you are as well, and that is that this process is predetermined. That the list that has been provided to each of these families has already been decided. This is a done deal. This is just the church letting the faithful know. You guys have really stood against that this is not a predetermined decision, that you are working through the process.
And I can understand people thinking that there's a predetermined list. It seems like the easiest way that this would have happened. But I can promise you the work that the team of Renewal has been putting into all of this, we're looking at real-time data. We're looking at things that have taken place as families and parishes have come together over the last 2 years. We've been looking and meeting with communities and different times and places to try to make sure that we have the most relevant information. And so there's been no preconceived plan in the background operating. We're trying to be as authentic and transparent as we possibly can throughout all of this. And that's why all the data has been provided.
Are you able to provide an example? Because I agree. I see you guys having these meetings, and then I see the fallout. And of course, we hear from people. Can you give an example of how maybe the process was thought to be, or these are the recommendations, but when you heard from a family, or when you heard from a particular parish leader or something like that, maybe it did alter your approach or something?
Sure. So as we're going through this whole process, what we've presented are recommendations. And so in those recommendations, the Renewal team looked at actual data of, sacraments, finances, demographics, that whole list of different things I've been talking about over the last 2 weeks. But then I also had conversations with the vicars foreign, with the pastors, with different people that have said, did you consider this factor? Because most leaders know something has to change. And in those conversations, it adapted some of those recommendations. And while we realize the recommendations, we know that if there's something we missed, this is the parish's opportunity to come back to us with a counter proposal. Those, really the standards for which the counter proposal will be, done and followed through will be shared on Monday, so everybody knows what that official process is.
So you talk a lot about the conversations. We know it's difficult for a lot of parishioners. I want to ask you, Father, you've been the one talking with parishioners, delivering the news. How has it been for you?
It's been a challenge because, I recognize that this is a very difficult job for the diocese and for how we're going forward. But at the same time, I believe that there's a lot of hope in all of this, because that's what we're focusing on, is to make sure that we're still relevant and viable, and we're focusing on people and, ministry for the future. While they're beautiful buildings and our churches hold a special place in our heart, if we keep focusing our resources and our time on buildings that continue to empty, we're missing the point of the people.
The church is going through its bankruptcy, $100 million lawsuit from the priest's sex abuse scandal. there are bills to be paid, and one of the reasons for right sizing is to be able to have the real estate available for it to be sold. Knowing the list right now, and again, the list is not final, it is still fluid, it likely will change from what we have right here based on information that comes out. So let's say that now. But if the list were to stand as it was now and the church went through and was able to sell some of these properties, would you be able to make people whole? Would you be able to fulfill those financial obligations with what you have now?
So that's a big unknown right now at this point. We're still waiting for, the settlement for the Chapter 11, so we don't even know a number at this point. But we're preparing in every way possible to make good on our commitments as a diocese and as our parishes and moving forward. That's what we're focusing on in all of this. What's the future look like?
So let's talk a little bit about what's next. The counter proposals, people have until July 15th. What happens then?
So we're saying that we know that it's going to take some time to get all this information to the right people in your communities. And so the time frame to July 15th is to talk with your people, get the right people around the table. Does this recommendation make sense? All we need to know by July 15th is, yes, we accept these recommendations, or no, we don't. We're going to offer a counter proposal. From July 15th to August 23rd is where we're saying you need to have a counter proposal ready to go to meet with the renewal team, as we'll then dialogue about that proposal, and so we can understand one another, and so that I can hear where things are coming from that maybe we missed and what data they're using, and then let's formulate that new proposal together.
If I may ask some advice for people, because while some are looking at this and their response could be anger or another type of emotion, some people are very much at a loss and they are nervous for their own future because the place that they believed was home generationally in their neighborhood is now going to be gone. What is your advice to them, for those people who are really struggling with the prospect of their place closing?
It's very difficult, and we recognize that, and we're praying for one another. At the same time, we have to realize that this is about the person of Jesus, not about the building. And that, that's very difficult to say, because these houses of worship were places that fostered that relationship, fostered that spiritual life. But yet we've got to look beyond that to what is still going to maintain and continue. And that's that relationship that those buildings fostered will continue in a new location.
Well, I think that's a good way to end off for now. Certainly a story we will continue following. Father Zielenieski, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father.